They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but when you're watching your own code generate $50 billion while your paycheck gets slashed by 65%, cold doesn't even begin to describe the rage burning inside you. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 months ago, I was the most valuable employee at Dataflow Industries. Today, I'm the reason their entire system is nothing but smoking ruins. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when greed meets genius, and genius decides to bite back. 2 years ago, I was just another face in the crowd at Dataflow Industries, a mid-sized tech company in Austin that specialized in data analytics for retail chains. Fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree and drowning in student debt, I took the first job offer that came my way. The salary was decent, $75,000 a year. Nothing spectacular, but enough to start paying off my loans and rent a tiny apartment near the office. Dataflow wasn't exactly Silicon Valley glamour. The office occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse, complete with exposed brick walls that the CEO, Marcus Whitfield, claimed gave the place character. The reality was that the air conditioning barely worked in summer, and the coffee machine had been broken for 6 months. But I didn't care about the aesthetics. I cared about the data. My official title was Junior Data Analyst, which meant I spent most of my days cleaning data sets and running basic statistical models for clients who wanted to know things like, which products sell better on Tuesdays? Or, do customers prefer blue packaging or red packaging? It was mind-numbing work, but it paid the bills. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening in October. I was staying late again, trying to finish a project for a major grocery chain client. They wanted to optimize their inventory management system, but their data was a mess. Incomplete records, inconsistent formatting, and gaps that made traditional analysis nearly impossible. I'd been banging my head against this problem for weeks. That's when I had the idea. Instead of trying to clean the messy data, what if I could create an algorithm that learned from the chaos itself? What if the inconsistencies and gaps weren't bugs but features, patterns that revealed something deeper about consumer behavior that clean data couldn't show? I started coding at 9 p.m. By 3 in the morning, I had the basic framework. By 6 a.m., I had something that actually worked. I called it the chaos algorithm. Not very creative, I know. But I was running on caffeine and determination. The algorithm didn't just analyze purchasing patterns. It predicted them. It could look at incomplete, messy retail data and tell you not just what customers were buying, but what they were going to buy next week, next month, even next quarter. It identified trends before they happened, spotted market shifts before anyone else noticed them, and did it all with an accuracy rate that made traditional forecasting models look like educated guesses. I ran it on our grocery chain clients' data as a test. The results were staggering. The algorithm predicted a 23% increase in organic produce sales 3 weeks before it actually happened. It identified a seasonal shift in frozen food preferences that the client's own analysts had completely missed. Most importantly, it showed them exactly how to adjust their inventory to maximize profits while minimizing waste. I was exhausted, but exhilarated. I'd created something genuinely revolutionary. This wasn't just an improvement on existing technology. It was a complete paradigm shift in how businesses could understand and anticipate consumer behavior. The next morning, I presented my findings to my direct supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd been with Dataflow for 8 years. Jennifer's eyes widened as she scrolled through my results. "Sarah, this is incredible," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" "Not yet," I replied. "I wanted to run it by you first." "Good. Don't show it to anyone else until we can present it properly. This could change everything for Dataflow." Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer and I refined the presentation. We ran the algorithm on data from 5 different clients, and every single time, it delivered results that seemed almost impossibly accurate. A clothing retailer discovered they were missing out on a 15% revenue increase by stocking the wrong sizes. A electronics chain learned they could reduce inventory costs by 30% without affecting customer satisfaction. Bookstore chain found patterns in reading preferences that helped them optimize their ordering 6 months in advance. The algorithm wasn't just predicting consumer behavior, it was predicting it with surgical precision. Finally, we were ready to present to the executive team. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the main conference room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that Marcus Whitfield liked to use for important presentations. I walked into that room carrying my laptop and a folder full of printouts, nervous but confident. Around the table sat the entire C-suite: Marcus Whitfield, the CEO, Rebecca Torres, the Chief Technology Officer, David Kim, the Chief Financial Officer, and Lisa Armstrong, the Chief Operating Officer. Jennifer introduced me as the developer of a revolutionary new approach to predictive analytics. For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through the chaos algorithm. I showed them the test results, explained the methodology, and demonstrated its potential applications. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of my voice and the occasional rustle of papers. When I finished, Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said slowly. "This algorithm of yours can predict consumer behavior with 94% accuracy?" "In our test cases, yes," I replied. "Obviously, real-world implementation would require more extensive testing, but the fundamental approach is sound." "And you developed this entirely on your own time?" "Well, I used company resources and data, but yes, the core development was done after hours." Marcus exchanged glances with the other executives. Rebecca Torres was the first to speak. "Sarah, what you've created here isn't just impressive, it's potentially worth millions, maybe tens of millions. Or more," added David Kim, flipping through the financial projections I'd prepared. "If we can scale this across all our clients, we're looking at revenue increases that could transform data flow from a mid-size firm into a major player." The excitement in the room was palpable. Lisa Armstrong was already talking about implementation timelines and client presentations. Rebecca was discussing the technical infrastructure we'd need to support large-scale deployment. Marcus was scribbling notes about marketing strategies and pricing models. I felt a surge of pride and anticipation. This was it, my big break, the moment that would launch my career from junior analyst to key innovator. I was already imagining the promotion, the raise, maybe even a stake in the company. "Sarah," Marcus said, bringing the room's attention back to me. "I want you to know that Dataflow recognizes the incredible value of what you've created. We're going to make sure you're properly compensated for this contribution." Those words echoed in my head as I walked back to my desk that afternoon. Properly compensated. I started doing mental calculations. If the algorithm really was worth tens of millions, surely my cut would be substantial. Maybe not millions, but definitely enough to pay off my student loans and finally afford a decent apartment. Over the next 6 weeks, everything moved at lightning speed. Rebecca's team worked around the clock to scale the algorithm for enterprise-level deployment. Lisa's operations team developed implementation protocols for rolling it out to existing clients. David's finance team created pricing models that positioned Dataflow as a premium analytics provider. Meanwhile, I found myself meeting after meeting, explaining the algorithm's capabilities to potential clients, troubleshooting technical issues, and refining the code to handle larger datasets. It was exhausting but thrilling work. I was no longer just a junior analyst. I was the creator of Dataflow's flagship product. The first major client presentation was with Megamart, a national retail chain with over 2,000 stores. Their chief data officer, a stern man named Robert Chen, listened skeptically as Marcus walked through our pitch. But when I demonstrated the algorithm's predictions for their Q4 holiday season, predictions that turned out to be accurate to within 2%. His skepticism evaporated. "How much?" he asked. "For a comprehensive implementation across all Megamart locations, we're looking at $800,000 for the initial setup, plus ongoing licensing fees," Marcus replied smoothly. Robert didn't even blink. Done. That was just the beginning. Within 3 months, we'd signed contracts with 12 major retail chains, 2 restaurant franchises, and a luxury goods consortium. The algorithm wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. Clients were seeing profit, increases of 20 to 40%, inventory waste dropped by enormous margins. Some companies were saving millions of dollars annually just in storage and logistics costs. Dataflow's revenue exploded. In 6 months, we went from a $20 million company to a $200 million company. Marcus hired 50 new employees, moved us to a gleaming new office building in downtown Austin, and started talking about expansion into international markets. Industry publications began calling the chaos algorithm the holy grail of predictive analytics. TechCrunch wrote a feature article about Dataflow's meteoric rise. Marcus appeared on CNBC to discuss the future of retail intelligence. Forbes named him one of their 40 under 40 rising business leaders. And through it all, I kept waiting for my reward. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The meeting that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday in March, exactly 1 year after I'd first presented the chaos algorithm to the executive team. By then, Dataflow had grown into something unrecognizable from the small company I'd joined. We occupied an entire 30-story building in downtown Austin, employed over 800 people, and had clients in 43 countries. The algorithm had evolved too. What started as a simple predictive model had become an entire ecosystem of interconnected systems. There was chaos retail for consumer goods, chaos finance for banking applications, chaos medical for healthcare supply chains, and chaos energy for utility companies. Each variant was built on my original framework, but customized for specific industries. The numbers were staggering. Dataflow's valuation had reached $12 billion. Investment firms were circling like sharks, offering Marcus buyout deals. That would make him one of the richest men in Texas. The algorithm was processing over 50 million data points daily, generating predictions that were reshaping entire industries, and I was still making $75,000 a year. Every time I brought up compensation with Jennifer, she'd give me the same response. "The executive team is discussing it. These things take time with a company this size." Every time I asked about equity or profit sharing, she'd redirect the conversation to how valuable my continued development work was to the company's future. But I wasn't stupid. I could see the Tesla Model S in Marcus's reserved parking spot. I could see Rebecca's designer handbags and David's Rolex. I watched Lisa post Instagram photos from her vacation in the Maldives while I was eating ramen noodles for dinner because I'd spent my grocery money on a conference registration to stay current with industry trends. The breaking point came during our quarterly all-hands meeting. Marcus stood at the front of the main auditorium, wearing what looked like a $5,000 suit, addressing the entire company about our unprecedented success. Dataflow's growth over the past year has exceeded our wildest projections, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. We've gone from a small analytics firm to a global leader in predictive intelligence. Our proprietary algorithms are revolutionizing how businesses understand their customers, their markets, and their futures. He clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of our revenue growth. The line shot up like a rocket. "This success belongs to all of us," Marcus continued. "Every person in this room has contributed to building something extraordinary, and I'm pleased to announce that this success will be shared with those who made it possible." My heart started racing. Finally, they were going to acknowledge my contribution. Effective immediately, All employees with more than 2 years of tenure will receive a 15% salary increase. Department heads will receive a 25% increase, and our executive team will receive equity packages reflecting their leadership in this transformation. The auditorium erupted in applause. People were cheering, hugging, pumping their fists in the air. I sat frozen in my chair, calculating rapidly in my head. 15% of $75,000 was $11,000. Before taxes, that would bring me to about $86,000 annually. $86,000 for creating an algorithm that had generated billions in value. I looked around the room at all the celebrating faces. Jennifer was clapping enthusiastically 2 rows ahead of me. Rebecca was shaking hands with other executives. David was already on his phone, probably calling his financial advisor. Marcus wasn't finished. I also want to recognize some of our key innovators who've driven our technological advancement. Sarah Chen, our senior data scientist, has been instrumental in developing and refining our core algorithms. Sarah, would you please stand? Senior data scientist. That was news to me. Apparently, I'd been promoted without anyone bothering to tell me. I stood reluctantly, my face burning as hundreds of pairs of eyes turned toward me. The applause felt hollow, patronizing. Sarah's dedication to excellence exemplifies the data flow spirit, Marcus continued. Her technical contributions have been invaluable to our success. I sat back down as quickly as I could, my mind racing. Invaluable contributions. Instrumental development. They were using my work to justify their billions, but somehow invaluable translated to a 15% raise. After the meeting, I cornered Jennifer in the hallway outside the auditorium. "We need to talk," I said, not caring who might overhear. Jennifer looked around nervously. "Of course. My office?" We walked in silence to the elevator, rode up to the executive floor, and settled into her corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin. Jennifer closed the door and turned to face me. "I know what you're thinking," she said before I could speak. "Do you?" "Because I'm thinking that I just watched Marcus announce equity packages for executives who've been here less time than me, while I get a 15% raise for creating the technology that built this entire company." Jennifer sat down behind her desk, her expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, I understand your frustration, but you have to understand the complexity of the situation. The algorithm you developed was created using company resources, during company time, on company equipment. Legally, Dataflow owns that intellectual property. I developed it after hours, on my own time. Using company data and company computers, the legal department has been very clear about this." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The legal department? "Sarah, when you created the algorithm, you were a Dataflow employee. Everything you create in the course of your employment belongs to the company. That's standard in every tech contract. But Marcus promised I'd be properly compensated. And you have been. You received a promotion to senior data scientist, and now you're getting a 15% salary increase. That's substantial recognition." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "Jennifer, my algorithm has generated billions of dollars in value. Billions. With a B. And you're telling me that a 15% raise is substantial recognition?" Jennifer's expression hardened slightly. "Sarah, I think you're overestimating your individual contribution. Yes, you wrote the initial code, but the algorithm's success is the result of collaborative effort. Rebecca's team scaled it for enterprise deployment. Lisa's team developed the implementation protocols. David's team created the business models. Marcus's leadership secured the clients and partnerships that made it profitable. Without my algorithm, none of that would exist. And without Dataflow's resources, your algorithm would still be a piece of code on your personal laptop. The company provided the infrastructure, the data, the client relationships, and the business expertise to turn your idea into a commercial success. I could feel my hands shaking with anger. So my idea is worth nothing, but their ability to monetize it is worth billions? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that success in business requires more than just technical innovation. It requires execution, marketing, partnerships, strategy. You provided the innovation. The company provided everything else. The company provided everything else because I gave them the innovation to build on. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. You're a talented programmer, but you're not a business person. You don't understand market dynamics, client relationships, or corporate strategy. The algorithm you created was impressive, but it was raw, unscalable, and commercially unviable in its original form. Dataflow transformed it into something that could actually generate revenue. So I should be grateful for the 15% raise? You should be grateful for the opportunity to work on cutting-edge technology at one of the fastest-growing companies in the industry. You should be grateful for the experience, the professional development, and the career advancement that Dataflow has provided. Most people would kill for the opportunities you've had here. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I see. So I should be grateful that my work made everyone else rich while I struggled to pay my student loans. Sarah, I think you need to take some time to think about this conversation. You're clearly emotional right now, and that's understandable. But you need to consider the bigger picture. Dataflow has invested millions in developing and marketing your algorithm. The company has taken enormous risks to bring it to market. It's not realistic to expect that you should receive the same compensation as executives who've been building businesses for decades. How much? I asked. Excuse me? How much is Dataflow worth now? With my algorithm driving the business? Jennifer hesitated. That's not really relevant to— How much, Jennifer? She sighed. The latest valuation puts us at approximately $12 billion. $12 billion. And my contribution to that $12 billion is worth an $86,000 salary. Your contribution is one part of a complex business ecosystem. You can't just— I can't what? I can't expect fair compensation for creating the technology that built this company? I can't expect to share in the success that my work made possible? Jennifer's patience was clearly wearing thin. Sarah, this conversation is getting us nowhere. You have a choice to make. You can accept the recognition and compensation that Dataflow is offering, or you can look for opportunities elsewhere. But you cannot hold the company hostage because you feel entitled to a bigger share of the profits. Entitled? Yes, entitled. You seem to think that writing code makes you entitled to ownership of the company. That's not how business works. Employees create value, and they're compensated with salaries and benefits. Owners take risks and reap rewards. You're an employee, Sarah. A well-compensated employee, but an employee nonetheless. I walked toward the door, then turned back. What if I leave and take my knowledge with me? Jennifer's expression went cold. I'd remind you that you signed a non-compete agreement when you joined Dataflow. You're prohibited from working for any competitor or starting a competing business for 2 years after leaving the company. You're also bound by a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding all proprietary technology and trade secrets. So I'm trapped. You're protected. Dataflow has made significant investments in your professional development. It's only fair that the company should benefit from those investments. I left Jennifer's office with my mind reeling. Non-compete agreements, NDAs, intellectual property clauses. They had me locked down tighter than a maximum security prison. That night. I went home to my tiny apartment and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. I pulled up my original chaos algorithm code, the version I'd written that Thursday night almost a year ago. Clean, elegant, revolutionary. The foundation of a $12 billion empire, an empire that I'd built but couldn't own. I thought about Jennifer's words. You're an employee, Sarah. A well-compensated employee, but an employee nonetheless. Well-compensated. Right. I opened a new document and started typing. If Dataflow wanted to treat me like just another employee, maybe it was time to show them what happened when that employee decided to stop being so cooperative. The algorithm was mine. I'd created it, refined it, and watched it grow into something that changed entire industries. I knew every line of code, every vulnerability, every backdoor. And I was about to use that knowledge in ways that Marcus Whitfield and his executive team never saw coming. 6 months after my devastating conversation with Jennifer, I thought I'd reached the bottom of corporate betrayal. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come, and it arrived on a crisp October morning that would forever change my relationship with Dataflow Industries. I'd spent those 6 months in a strange state of suspended animation. My salary had indeed increased to $86,000, and I'd been given a marginally better office on the 15th floor with a window that looked out onto the parking garage. The title, Senior Data Scientist, came with slightly more interesting projects, but I was essentially doing the same work I'd been doing for 2 years, maintaining and optimizing my own algorithm while watching other people get rich from it. The chaos algorithm had continued its meteoric success. Dataflow's client roster now included Fortune 500 companies across every major industry. We'd expanded into Europe and Asia, with offices in London, Tokyo, and Singapore. The algorithm was processing over 1 billion data points daily, and its predictions were so accurate that some clients had restructured their entire business models around its insights. Marcus had appeared on the cover of Time magazine as one of the tech visionaries reshaping global commerce. The article barely mentioned my name, referring to me only as a junior developer who contributed to the early algorithm development. Reading that made me physically ill. But the real punch to the gut came when I discovered what the executives were actually earning from my work. It happened by accident. I was working late on a Thursday, trying to resolve a performance issue with the European deployment, when I needed to access some financial data stored on the company's internal servers. My security clearance had been upgraded along with my promotion, giving me access to directories I'd never seen before. That's when I stumbled across the executive compensation files. What I found made my blood run cold. Marcus's total compensation package for the previous year was $47 million. Rebecca had received $32 million. David and Lisa had each taken home $28 million. But that wasn't even the shocking part. The shocking part was the equity distribution spreadsheet dated just 3 months after my original algorithm presentation. Marcus owned 38% of Dataflow. Rebecca owned 15%. David and Lisa each owned 12%. Jennifer owned 8%. Combined, the 5 executives controlled 85% of a company worth $12 billion. I did the math in my head. Marcus's 38% stake was worth $4.5 billion. Rebecca's 15% was worth $1.8 billion. Even Jennifer, who'd spent months explaining to me why I didn't deserve more than a 15% raise, was worth nearly $1 billion. Meanwhile, I was making $86,000 a year and sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 roommates because I couldn't afford to live alone in Austin. I sat staring at those numbers for nearly an hour, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just unfair compensation. This was systemic theft. They'd taken my innovation, built an empire on it, and distributed billions of dollars among themselves while throwing me scraps. But the story gets worse. 2 weeks later, I was called into another meeting with the executive team. This time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of the celebratory mood from previous meetings, there was tension in the air. Marcus looked tired, David seemed nervous, and Rebecca kept checking her phone. "Sarah," Marcus began, "we need to discuss some changes to your role and compensation." My heart started pounding. After discovering their equity stakes, I'd been preparing to demand a significant raise or equity package of my own. Maybe they'd finally realized how unfairly they'd been treating me. "As you know, Data flow has experienced unprecedented growth over the past 18 months, Marcus continued. We've expanded globally, diversified our client base, and established ourselves as the leader in predictive analytics. This success has allowed us to attract top-tier talent from companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. I nodded, not sure where this was going. We've recently hired Dr. Michael Harrison from Google's DeepMind division to serve as our new Chief Technology Officer. Rebecca will be transitioning to Chief Innovation Officer, focusing on strategic partnerships and new product development. Dr. Michael Harrison. I'd heard of him. He was a legend in machine learning, with a PhD from Stanford and a track record of building scalable AI systems. But why were they telling me about executive reshuffling? Michael brings a level of technical expertise and industry experience that will be crucial as we continue scaling our operations, Marcus said. He'll be overseeing all technology development, including optimization and evolution of our core algorithms. A cold feeling was spreading through my chest. What does this mean for my role? David Kim cleared his throat. Sarah, as we've grown, we've realized that our technology stack needs to be completely re-architected for enterprise-scale deployment. The current algorithm, while innovative, was built for a much smaller operation. We need systems that can handle thousands of concurrent clients, process petabytes of data, and integrate with enterprise software platforms. I can do that, I said quickly. I know the algorithm better than anyone. I can scale it, optimize it, whatever you need. The issue, Rebecca interjected, is that scaling requires more than just programming skills. It requires deep expertise in distributed systems, cloud architecture, and enterprise integration. Michael has 20 years of experience building systems at Google's scale. He's the right person to lead this transition. So, what's my role in all this? Marcus leaned forward. We want you to continue as a senior data scientist, working under Michael's leadership. You'll be part of a team of specialists focused on algorithm optimization and performance tuning. Working under Michael's leadership. The words hit me, like a physical blow. My own algorithm, and I'd be working under someone else's leadership to modify it. There's one other thing, Marcus continued, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. Given the current economic climate and our need to invest heavily in the re-architecture project, we're implementing some cost-cutting measures across the organization. Cost-cutting measures. At a company worth $12 billion. All non-executive. Salaries are being reduced by 15%, effective immediately. This is a temporary measure while we complete the technology transition. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. 15% reduction. My $86,000 salary would drop to $73,000, less than I'd been making when I first created the algorithm. You're cutting my pay? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's across the board, Lisa said. Everyone below the executive level is affected. It's not personal. Not personal. I looked around the room at these people who collectively owned billions of dollars worth of a company built on my work, and they were telling me that cutting my salary wasn't personal. This is temporary, right? I asked. The salary adjustments will be reviewed quarterly, David said. As soon as the re-architecture is complete and we've stabilized our new operational model, we'll reassess compensation across the organization. How long is the re-architecture expected to take? 12 to 18 months, Rebecca replied. 12 to 18 months of making $73,000 a year while watching billionaires manage my own creation. I have a question, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Of course, Marcus replied. What happens to employees who disagree with these changes? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus exchanged glances with the other executives before answering. Sarah, I hope you understand that these decisions weren't made lightly. We've consulted with our board, our investors, and our legal team. This is the best path forward for Dataflow's long-term success. That didn't answer my question. Employees who can't support the company's strategic direction are welcome to seek opportunities elsewhere, Jennifer said. Though I'd remind you of your contractual obligations regarding non-disclosure and non-compete agreements. There it was again, the golden handcuffs. I couldn't leave without violating my non-compete, which would result in massive legal penalties and potentially criminal charges. But staying meant accepting a pay cut while my own work generated billions for people who saw me as nothing more than a replaceable cog. Do I have a choice in this? I asked. You have the choice to be part of Dataflow's continued success, or to find opportunities elsewhere, Marcus said. But if you choose to stay, we need your full commitment to the new organizational structure and compensation framework. I looked around the room one more time. These people had stolen my life's work, built a fortune on it, and were now cutting my pay while bringing in an outsider to manage my own creation. They were asking for my full commitment to a system designed to exploit me. I need some time to think about this, I said. Of course, Marcus replied. Take the weekend. We'll need your decision by Monday morning. I walked out of that conference room in a daze. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like it took hours. I sat down at my desk and stared at my computer screen, but I couldn't focus on anything. The numbers kept spinning through my head. $12 billion company valuation, billions in executive equity, $73,000 salary. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I cried. I cried for the naive young woman who'd thought that innovation and hard work would be rewarded. I cried for the dreams I'd had of financial security and professional recognition. I cried for the future I'd thought I was building with my breakthrough algorithm. But mostly I cried from rage. By Saturday morning, I'd made my decision. If Dataflow wanted to treat me like a disposable employee, then maybe it was time to show them what happened when their most valuable asset decided to become their biggest liability. I spent the weekend researching corporate sabotage laws, studying the technical specifications of our server infrastructure, and planning something that would make Marcus Whitfield and his executive team regret every decision they'd made since the day I'd walked into their conference room with my revolutionary algorithm. The chaos algorithm had made them billionaires. Now it was time for a different kind of chaos, the kind that would remind them exactly who held the real power in this relationship. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. When I walked into Marcus's office that Monday, I was carrying a printed copy of my resignation letter and a USB drive containing something that would change everything. I had no idea that within 72 hours, Dataflow Industries would cease to exist as a functioning company, and that the algorithm I'd created to predict the future would become the instrument of its own creator's revenge. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to deliver my answer to Marcus's ultimatum. I've made my decision, I told him, placing the resignation letter on his desk. Marcus picked it up and read it quickly, his expression never changing. This is unfortunate, Sarah. I'd hoped you'd choose to stay and be part of our continued growth. I'm sure you did, I replied. You understand that your non-compete agreement remains in effect for 24 months, regardless of whether you resign or are terminated. I understand perfectly. And you're aware that any violation of your non-disclosure agreement will result in immediate legal action and financial penalties? Crystal clear. Marcus set the letter down and looked at me, carefully. Sarah, I want you to know that we appreciate your contributions to Dataflow. You're a talented programmer, and I'm sure you'll find success wherever you go next. Thank you, I said. That means a lot coming from someone who's worth $4.5 billion because of my work. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. I think we've covered this ground before. Dataflow's success is the result of many people's contributions. Of course it is, I said, standing up. I'll clean out my desk and be gone by the end of the day. That won't be necessary, Marcus said. Security will escort you out this morning. Your personal items will be shipped to your address on file. I smiled. I figured as much. 20 minutes later, I was walking across the Dataflow parking lot, with a security guard beside me, carrying only my purse and the USB drive I'd palmed before leaving my desk. In that drive was something that would teach Marcus Whitfield and his billion-dollar executives the most expensive lesson of their lives. The algorithm that had made them rich was about to make them very, very sorry. The first thing I did after leaving Dataflow was absolutely nothing. For 3 days, I sat in my tiny apartment, eating cereal for every meal and staring at the USB drive that contained my future and Dataflow's destruction. The security escort had been humiliating, but it had also been perfect. They'd been so focused on getting me out quickly that they'd never bothered to check what I might be taking with me. The USB drive contained something far more valuable than just files. It contained my entire digital life at Dataflow. Root access credentials, administrative passwords, system architecture diagrams, and most importantly, the complete source code for every iteration of the chaos algorithm, including the modifications I'd made just days before my resignation. But I wasn't some angry employee looking to cause random damage. What I was planning required precision, timing, and an understanding of corporate psychology that most people don't possess. I needed Dataflow to reach the absolute peak of their success before I pulled the rug out from under them. The higher they climbed, the harder they'd fall. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. 3 weeks after my resignation, Dataflow announced the biggest deal in the company's history. A comprehensive partnership with Walmart that would integrate the chaos algorithm into every aspect of their global operations. The contract was worth $800 million over 5 years, with potential extensions that could reach $2 billion. Marcus held a press conference at the Austin Convention Center, standing behind a podium with the Dataflow and Walmart logos side by side. I watched it live on Bloomberg, sitting on my couch in sweatpants, eating instant noodles while my former boss announced a deal that would make him even richer. This partnership represents a fundamental shift in how global retail operates, Marcus declared to the assembled crowd of reporters and industry analysts. The chaos algorithm will optimize Walmart's inventory management, supply chain logistics, and customer experience across over 11,000 stores worldwide. We're not just predicting the future of retail, we're creating it. The stock market loved it. Dataflow's valuation jumped from $12 billion to $22 billion overnight. The financial press went crazy, with headlines like Dataflow doubles valuation with Walmart mega deal and Chaos algorithm poised to revolutionize global retail. Dr. Michael Harrison, the new CTO they'd hired to replace me, gave several interviews, explaining how they'd enhanced and scaled the algorithm for enterprise deployment. He spoke about it like he'd built it himself, using technical jargon to impress reporters who didn't understand the underlying technology. Watching him take credit for my work was like watching someone steal your car and then win a racing championship with it. But the Walmart deal was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, Dataflow announced partnerships with Amazon for their logistics operations, with Bank of America for fraud detection, and with General Electric for predictive maintenance. Each deal was worth hundreds of millions, and each one pushed Dataflow's valuation higher. By December, Dataflow was worth $53 billion. $53 billion. Marcus Whitfield had become one of the 20 richest people in America, all because of an algorithm I'd written during a single sleepless night 18 months earlier. The media coverage was relentless. Marcus appeared on every major business show, from CNBC's Squawk Box to 60 Minutes. Harvard Business School wrote a case study about Dataflow's meteoric rise. The algorithm was being hailed as the most significant breakthrough in business intelligence since the invention of the computer. And through it all, I was collecting unemployment benefits and eating ramen noodles. But I wasn't bitter anymore. I was focused. Every news article, every interview, every stock price milestone was just confirmation that my plan was going to work, even better than I'd originally imagined. The bigger Dataflow became, the more devastating their fall would be. I spent those months preparing meticulously. I rented a small office space in a co-working building downtown, telling people I was starting a freelance consulting business. What I was actually doing was building the most sophisticated corporate sabotage operation in history. The beauty of my position was that I didn't just understand Dataflow's technology, I had created it. Every system they were using was built on my foundation, which meant I knew every vulnerability, every backdoor, and every point of failure. More importantly, I knew exactly how to make their destruction look like a natural system failure rather than deliberate sabotage. The first phase of my plan involved something I called gradual degradation. Using my administrative access, which, incredibly, they'd never revoked, I began making tiny modifications to the algorithm's core functions. Nothing dramatic, just small changes to probability calculations that would accumulate over time. Was essentially introducing controlled chaos into the chaos algorithm. The changes were so subtle that they wouldn't be detected by normal monitoring systems, but they would slowly corrupt the accuracy of the algorithm's predictions. Instead of the 94% accuracy rate that had made Dataflow famous, the algorithm would gradually become less reliable. The genius of this approach was that the degradation would be slow enough that it wouldn't trigger immediate alarms, but fast enough that within a few months, the algorithm would be producing predictions that were not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. And when you're dealing with clients like Walmart, Amazon, and Bank of America, spectacularly wrong predictions don't just mean embarrassment. They mean billions of dollars in losses. But the gradual degradation was just the setup. The real destruction would come from what I called the cascade failure, a simultaneous system-wide collapse that would make it impossible for Dataflow to serve any of their clients. To understand how I plan to do this, you need to know how Dataflow's infrastructure actually worked. The chaos algorithm wasn't just one program running on one computer. It was a distributed system spanning dozens of servers across multiple data centers, processing millions of calculations simultaneously and serving hundreds of clients in real time. Chapter 1. Entire system was held together by what engineers call dependency chains. Essentially, each component relied on other components to function properly. If component A failed, it would cause component B to malfunction, which would cascade to components C, D, and E. In a well-designed system, there are safeguards to prevent these cascade failures. But I had designed many of those safeguards myself, which meant I knew exactly how to disable them. My plan was elegant in its simplicity. On a predetermined date, I would simultaneously trigger failures in 7 critical system components. Each failure would appear to be the result of a different cause: hardware malfunction, software bug, network timeout, database corruption. To outside observers, it would look like Dataflow had simply been unlucky enough to experience multiple, unrelated system failures at the same time, but the cascade effect would be devastating. As each component failed, it would overload the remaining components, causing them to fail as well. Within minutes, the entire Dataflow infrastructure would collapse like a house of cards. Every client would lose access to their predictive analytics. Every real-time system would go offline, every automated process would stop functioning, and because the failures would appear to be caused by fundamental flaws in the system architecture rather than external sabotage, Dataflow wouldn't be able to simply restart their servers and resume operations. They would need to completely rebuild their infrastructure from scratch, a process that would take months and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The third phase of my plan was perhaps the most diabolical. While Dataflow was dealing with the immediate crisis of their system collapse, I would leak information to the press revealing the gradual degradation that had been occurring for months before the cascade failure. Financial journalists would discover that Dataflow's algorithm had been producing increasingly inaccurate predictions for their biggest clients, but that the company had either failed to notice or had deliberately concealed the problems. The leaked information would include internal emails, system monitoring reports, and client complaint logs, all of which I had access to through my administrative privileges. The story would be devastating. Dataflow had been selling defective technology to their biggest clients while management collected billion-dollar paydays. I had already identified the journalists I would contact. Sarah Martinez from the Wall Street Journal, who specialized in corporate fraud investigations. David Wong from the Financial Times, who had written extensively about tech company accountability. And most importantly, Rachel Stevens from 60 Minutes, who had a track record of exposing corporate malfeasance to national audiences. The combination of system collapse and fraud allegations would be fatal to Dataflow's business. Their clients would immediately terminate their contracts and demand refunds. Their stock price would crater. Their executives would face congressional hearings, SEC investigations, and shareholder lawsuits. The company that had been built on my stolen work would be destroyed by my stolen access. But I wasn't finished yet. The final phase of my plan would ensure that Marcus Whitfield and his executive team faced personal consequences for their greed. Using my access to Dataflow's internal systems, I had been quietly documenting every instance of potential securities, fraud, tax evasion, and regulatory violation I could find. It turned out that when you steal billions of dollars through wage theft and then flaunt your wealth publicly, you tend to get sloppy about other forms of financial crime. Marcus had been using company funds to pay for personal expenses. Rebecca had been selling stock based on non-public information about client contracts. David had been manipulating financial reports to inflate the company's valuation for investor presentations. All of this information would find its way to the appropriate authorities, the SEC, the IRS, the FBI's white-collar crime division. Even if Dataflow somehow survived the business collapse, its executives would be facing criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. By January, everything was in place. The gradual degradation was proceeding perfectly. Dataflow's accuracy rate had dropped to 87%, and I could see from their internal monitoring systems that some clients were starting to ask questions about inconsistent predictions. Dr. Michael Harrison and his team were attributing the problems to market volatility and evolving consumer behavior patterns, but I knew they were starting to worry. The cascade failure mechanisms were installed and tested. I had created 7 different trigger programs, each designed to activate specific vulnerabilities in Dataflow's infrastructure. The programs were scheduled to execute simultaneously on Valentine's Day, a date I'd chosen because I thought it would be poetic for Marcus. To lose his fortune on the day associated with love and relationships, the press contacts were ready. I had prepared comprehensive dossiers for each journalist, containing enough evidence to support months of investigative reporting. The criminal evidence was organized and ready for delivery to law enforcement agencies. Everything was perfect. After 18 months of watching thieves get rich off my work, I was finally ready to give them exactly what they deserved. But 3 days before Valentine's Day, something happened that changed everything. Something that made me realize my original plan wasn't nearly ambitious enough. Dataflow announced that they were going public. Marcus held another press conference, this time at the New York Stock Exchange, announcing that Dataflow would offer shares to the public in what was expected to be the largest IPO in tech history. The initial public offering was scheduled for March 15th, with shares expected to be priced at $85 each. At that price, the IPO would raise over $12 billion, making Dataflow one of the most valuable public companies in the world. Dataflow's public offering represents more than just a financial milestone, Marcus announced from the NYSE trading floor. It represents the democratization of artificial intelligence. For the first time, individual investors will have the opportunity to own a piece of the technology that's reshaping the global economy. I watched that press conference with a smile spreading across my face. Marcus thought he was announcing his ultimate victory, the moment when his stolen wealth would be permanently secured through public ownership. What he was actually doing was giving me the opportunity to destroy not just Dataflow, but every investor foolish enough to buy into his fraud. $12 billion in investor money. Hundreds of thousands of individual shareholders. Pension. Funds, retirement accounts, and college savings plans all bet their futures on the continued success of my stolen algorithm. It was time to expand my timeline and increase the scope of destruction. Valentine's Day was too early. I needed to wait until after the IPO, when the maximum number of people would suffer from Dataflow's collapse. March 16th. One day after the IPO. That's when I would trigger the cascade failure and watch $53 billion in market value disappear in a matter of hours. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And Marcus Whitfield was about to fall harder than any CEO in history. March 15th, 2024. IPO Day. I woke up at 5 a.m. and made myself a cup of coffee. Real coffee, not instant, because I'd decided this day deserved something special. Outside my apartment window, Austin was still dark, but I knew that 3 time zones away, the New York Stock Exchange was preparing for what CNBC was calling the tech IPO of the decade. I had my laptop open to multiple browser tabs. Bloomberg, terminal showing pre-market trading, Dataflow's investor relations page, and most importantly, my administrative access panel to Dataflow's core systems. Everything was ready. In less than 24 hours, Marcus Whitfield would learn what it felt like to lose everything. The opening bell rang at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. Dataflow's stock began trading under the ticker symbol DTFL at $85 per share, exactly as projected. Within the first hour, the price had jumped to 127s. By lunch, it was at 145s. The media was going crazy. Headlines everywhere proclaimed Dataflow's IPO as a massive success, with some analysts predicting the stock could reach $200 by the end of the week. I watched Marcus being interviewed live from the NYSE trading floor, wearing a custom navy suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Behind him, the electronic ticker showed DTFL climbing higher and higher. The interviewer asked him about his company's meteoric rise. 3 years ago, Dataflow was just an idea, Marcus said, his smile so bright it could power the entire trading floor. Today, we're proof that American innovation and entrepreneurship can still change the world. The chaos algorithm isn't just technology, it's a revolution in how businesses understand their customers, their markets, and their futures. Revolution. The word made me laugh out loud. He had no idea how right he was about a revolution coming, but it wasn't going to be the kind he expected. By market close, Dataflow had finished at $156 per share, giving the company a market capitalization of just over $68 billion. $68 billion. Marcus's personal stake was now worth over $25 billion, making him one of the 15 richest people on Earth. The financial press was calling it one of the most successful IPOs in history. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen, running through the execution plan one final time. At exactly 9:47 a.m. the next morning, chosen because it was the precise time I'd first presented the chaos algorithm to Dataflow's executives, I would trigger the cascade failure that would destroy everything Marcus had built on my stolen work. March 16th arrived gray and drizzly, which felt appropriate for what I was about to do. I'd taken the day off from my new consulting gig, a legitimate freelance data analysis business. I'd started to pay the bills while planning Dataflow's destruction. My clients thought I was attending a technical conference. In a way, I was about to give the most important presentation of my career. At 9:45 a.m., I opened the Cascade Failure program I'd spent months perfecting. The interface was surprisingly simple, just 7 buttons labeled with component names: Authentication Server, Database Cluster, Load Balancer, Cache Layer, API Gateway, Monitoring System, and Backup Controller. Each button would trigger a different type of failure, and when activated simultaneously, they would create a cascading collapse that would bring down Dataflow's entire infrastructure. I checked the financial markets. DTFL was trading at $162 in pre-market, up another 4% from the previous day's close. Institutional investors were still buying, convinced that data flow represented the future of business intelligence. Pension funds, mutual funds, and ETFs had poured billions into the stock overnight. At 9:46, I pulled up Dataflow's real-time monitoring dashboard. Everything showed green, all systems operational, all clients connected, all predictions processing normally. Dr. Michael Harrison and his team had no idea that their world was about to end. AMI clicked all 7 buttons simultaneously. For exactly 12 seconds, nothing visible happened. The cascade failure programs activated silently, each one exploiting different vulnerabilities I'd built into Dataflow's infrastructure months earlier. To anyone monitoring the system, everything still appeared normal. Then the authentication server went down. Within Dataflow's Austin headquarters, every employee suddenly found themselves locked out of their systems. Computer screens across the building displayed error messages. Authentication failed. Please contact system administrator. Phones started ringing as client companies reported that they couldn't access their Dataflow dashboards. 30 seconds. Later, the database cluster began experiencing random corruption errors. Years of client data became temporarily inaccessible. The chaos algorithm, which required constant access to historical data to generate predictions, started producing error messages instead of analysis. 1 minute after that, the load balancer failed catastrophically. This component was responsible for distributing incoming requests across Dataflow's server network. When it went down, all client traffic began hitting a single server, which immediately became overwhelmed and crashed. The cache layer failure came next, followed by the API gateway collapse. Each component failure created exponentially more load on the remaining systems, exactly as I'd designed. It was like watching dominoes fall, except each domino was worth billions of dollars. By 9:52 a.m., Dataflow's entire infrastructure was offline. Every client, from Walmart to Amazon to Bank of America, had lost access to their predictive analytics. Automated systems that relied on real-time algorithm updates began making errors. Supply chain optimizations stopped working. Fraud detection systems went blind. Inventory management systems started over-ordering and under-ordering simultaneously. But the most beautiful part was watching the monitoring system fail last. For 4 minutes after the initial cascade began, Dataflow's technical team could see their entire infrastructure collapsing in real time, but couldn't do anything to stop it. They watched helplessly as green status indicators turned yellow, then red, then simply disappeared as each component went offline. I had a live feed of Dataflow's main server room through a security camera I'd gained access to months earlier. I watched technicians running between server racks, frantically checking cables and rebooting systems. Dr. Michael Harrison appeared on screen, pointing at monitors and shouting instructions that I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. The stock market's reaction was swift and brutal. By 10:15 a.m., DTFL had dropped from $162 to $89. News of Dataflow's system outage was spreading across financial news networks. CNBC ran a breaking news banner. Dataflow experiences major system outage. Stock plummets. But this was just the beginning. At 10:30 a.m., I initiated Phase 2 of my plan. Using encrypted email accounts I'd set up months earlier, I sent comprehensive dossiers to Sarah Martinez at the Wall Street Journal, David Wong at the Financial Times, and Rachel Stevens at 60 Minutes. Each dossier contained months of evidence showing that Dataflow's algorithm had been producing increasingly inaccurate predictions while management concealed the problems from clients and investors. The evidence was devastating. Internal emails showed Dr. Harrison expressing concerns about algorithmic drift and prediction inconsistencies weeks before the IPO. Financial reports revealed that several major clients had complained about inaccurate forecasts, but had been assured that the issues were temporary market volatility, Most damning of all, I included recordings of executive meetings where Marcus and his team discussed whether to delay the IPO until they could resolve the accuracy problems. They had known the algorithm was failing and had taken the company public anyway. By 11 a.m., Rachel Stevens called me back. I'd included my burner phone number in the 60 Minutes dossier, identifying myself as a former Dataflow employee with direct knowledge of systematic fraud. The conversation was brief, but electric. "These documents you sent," Rachel said. "Can you verify their authenticity?" "Every single one," I replied. "I have access to Dataflow's internal systems. I can provide additional evidence, real-time monitoring data, whatever you need. This is potentially the biggest corporate fraud story since Enron. Are you willing to go on camera?" I paused. Going public would mean giving up my anonymity, but it would also ensure that Marcus and his executives faced maximum exposure for their crimes. "Yes," I said. "But I want to tell the whole story. Not just the fraud, but how they stole my work and built a fortune on it while cutting my salary. We'll need to verify everything independently. But if this holds up, we're looking at a major investigative piece. Can you be in New York tomorrow?" By noon, the Wall Street Journal had published their first article, "Dataflow IPO under investigation following system collapse and fraud allegations." The article, based on the documents I'd provided, revealed that Dataflow had been aware of significant algorithmic problems for months before going public, but had failed to disclose these issues to investors. The stock price went into free fall. By 1 p.m., DTFL was trading at $34. By 2 p.m., it was at $18. Trading was halted twice as the stock lost over 80% of its value in a single day. The Nasdaq announced they were reviewing whether to suspend Dataflow's listing entirely. But the system outage and stock collapse were nothing compared to what happened when the algorithm's failure began cascading through Dataflow's client systems. Walmart's inventory management system, which relied on Dataflow's predictions to optimize stock levels across 11,000 stores, began making catastrophic ordering errors. The algorithm's final predictions before the crash had been spectacularly wrong. It had projected massive demand for winter coats in Florida and swimwear in Minnesota. Walmart's automated ordering system had purchased millions of dollars in misallocated inventory before human managers could intervene. Amazon's logistics network, which used Dataflow's predictions to pre-position packages in distribution centers, found itself with packages in completely wrong locations. Delivery trucks in Seattle were loaded with packages destined for Miami. The algorithm's final location predictions had been so inaccurate that Amazon estimated it would take weeks to untangle the mess. Bank of America's fraud detection system, which relied on Dataflow's behavioral predictions to identify suspicious transactions, began flagging normal purchases as potential fraud while allowing actual fraudulent transactions to pass through undetected. The bank was forced to manually review thousands of transactions and issue apologies to customers whose legitimate purchases had been blocked. By 3 p.m., Dataflow's clients had collectively estimated their losses from the algorithm failure at over $2 billion. Walmart announced they were immediately terminating their contract and demanding a full refund. Amazon followed within the hour. By market close, every major Dataflow client had either terminated their contracts or suspended their services pending investigation. The financial damage was staggering. Dataflow's stock finished the day at $11.50, down over 90% from its IPO price just 24 hours earlier. The company had lost nearly $60 billion in market value in a single trading session, the largest single-day loss in stock market history. Marcus Whitfield, who had been worth $25 billion that morning, saw his net worth drop to under $3 billion by evening. Rebecca, David, Lisa, and Jennifer collectively lost over $15 billion as their equity stakes became nearly worthless. But I wasn't finished yet. That evening, I initiated Phase 3, the criminal evidence dump. Using secure file transfer systems, I sent comprehensive evidence packages to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Texas Attorney General's Office. The evidence documented years of securities, fraud, tax evasion, and wire fraud by Dataflow's executive team. Marcus had been using company funds to purchase personal real estate and luxury items. Rebecca had been selling stock based on insider information about client contracts. David had been manipulating financial reports to inflate Dataflow's valuation for investor presentations. Lisa had been creating fake consulting contracts to funnel company money to her personal accounts. Each evidence package included bank records, email correspondence, accounting documents, and recorded phone calls that I'd been collecting for months through my administrative access to Dataflow's systems. The next morning, FBI agents arrived at Dataflow's headquarters with search warrants. News cameras captured Marcus being escorted from the building in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled and his billion-dollar smile replaced by the hollow stare of a man who'd lost everything. The 60 Minutes interview aired 3 days later. For 22 minutes, I told the complete story of how I'd created the chaos algorithm, how Dataflow's executives had stolen my work, and how they'd defrauded investors while cutting my salary. The interview included hidden camera footage of my resignation meeting with Marcus, where he'd dismissed my contributions while sitting in an office decorated with awards for his revolutionary algorithm. The public reaction was explosive. Social media erupted with outrage over corporate greed and wage theft. Congressional representatives called for hearings on intellectual property rights and employee compensation. Labor unions held rallies demanding stronger protections for workers, whose innovations generate corporate profits. Within a week, Marcus Whitfield was facing federal charges that could result in life in prison. Rebecca, David, Lisa, and Jennifer were all indicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. The company they'd built on my stolen work was bankrupt, its assets being liquidated to pay client refunds and legal settlements. Dataflow Industries officially ceased operations on March 30th, exactly 2 weeks after their IPO. The company that had been worth $68 billion at its peak was sold for parts, generating just enough money to cover a fraction of their legal liabilities. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when I received a handwritten letter from Marcus in federal prison. He'd been denied bail and was awaiting trial on 17 federal charges. The letter was brief. "Sarah, I know you'll probably never forgive me, but I need you to know that I understand now what we did to you was wrong. You created something incredible and we stole it from you. I deserve what's happening to me. I just wish it hadn't taken destroying so many other lives for me to realize how wrong we were. I'm sorry." I read the letter once, then threw it in the trash. Sometimes justice comes through the courts. Sometimes it comes through karma. And sometimes, when the system fails you completely, you have to create your own justice. The algorithm I'd built to predict the future had instead become the instrument of the past's reckoning. Marcus Whitfield and his executives had stolen my life's work and tried to reduce me to nothing more than a disposable employee. Now they knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything. 6 months after Dataflow's collapse, I was sitting in a coffee shop in San Francisco, reading the final court ruling on my laptop. Marcus Whitfield had been sentenced to 23 years in federal prison for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Rebecca Torres got 18 years. David Kim and Lisa Armstrong each received 15 years. Jennifer Walsh, who'd cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal, got 5 years and permanent disbarment from serving as a corporate officer. The judge's statement during Marcus's sentencing had been particularly satisfying. The defendant built a multi-billion-dollar empire on stolen intellectual property while systematically exploiting the very employee whose innovation made his fortune possible. This case represents corporate greed at its most egregious, and the sentence must reflect society's condemnation of such behavior. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning of their problems. The civil lawsuits had been even more devastating. The class action lawsuit filed on behalf of Dataflow's IPO investors had resulted in a settlement requiring the executives to pay back every penny they'd earned from their stock sales. Since most of their wealth had been tied up in now worthless Dataflow equity, this meant selling their mansions, their luxury cars, their vacation properties, and anything else of value they owned. Marcus's $47 million estate in the Austin Hills was sold at auction for $12 million, with the proceeds going to the Investor Settlement Fund. Rebecca's art collection, which she'd spent years building with her Dataflow bonuses, was liquidated for $8 million. David's yacht, his private jet, and his collection of vintage sports cars generated another $15 million for the settlement fund. But the lawsuit that had meant the most to me personally was the one I'd filed for intellectual property theft and wage violations. My lawyer, a brilliant woman named Patricia Rodriguez who specialized in employment law, had argued that Dataflow owed me not just fair compensation for my algorithm, but a percentage of every dollar the company had ever earned using my technology. The settlement had been announced just last week, $847 million, plus ownership of all intellectual property rights to the Chaos algorithm and its derivatives. After legal fees and taxes, I'd netted about $520 million, enough to ensure I'd never have to worry about money again. More importantly, I now owned the technology that had started this entire saga. Every version of the Chaos algorithm, every modification Dataflow had made, every application they'd developed, it all belonged to me now. The judge had ruled that since the original innovation was mine and Dataflow had essentially stolen it through systematic wage theft, I deserved to reclaim my life's work. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus Whitfield had tried to reduce me to a disposable employee worth $73,000 a year. Now I was worth more than he'd ever been, and I owned the technology that he'd thought belonged to him. But the money and the legal victories weren't what had given me the most satisfaction. That had come from the congressional hearings that followed Dataflow's collapse. 3 months after the crash, the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology had held hearings on intellectual property rights in the technology industry. I'd been invited to testify about my experience, and my testimony had been broadcast live on C-SPAN to millions of viewers. Sitting at the witness table in the Rayburn House office building, I'd told my story to a room full of congresspeople, reporters, and industry executives. I'd explained how I'd created revolutionary technology while working for poverty wages, how Dataflow's executives had systematically exploited my contributions while enriching themselves, and how the current legal system made it almost impossible for employees to protect their innovations from corporate theft. The committee chair, Representative Maria Santos from California, had been particularly interested in the details of my non-compete agreement and NDA. Ms. Chen, she'd asked, in your opinion, are these types of employment contracts being used to trap innovative employees in exploitative situations? Absolutely, I replied. These contracts aren't designed to protect legitimate business interests. They're designed to prevent employees from seeking fair compensation for their contributions. Dataflow used my non-compete to ensure I couldn't leave and start a competing business, even though they were systematically underpaying me for technology that was generating billions in revenue. My testimony had helped inspire the innovation. Workers' Protection Act, a bipartisan bill that placed strict limits on non-compete agreements and required companies to provide equity compensation to employees whose innovations generated substantial revenue. The bill had passed both houses of Congress and been signed into law just 2 months ago. I'd also become something of an accidental spokesperson for workers' rights in the tech industry. Harvard Business School had invited me to guest lecture on innovation and fair compensation. MIT had offered me a visiting professorship. Tech workers across Silicon Valley had started organizing unions and demanding equity participation in the companies they helped build. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome had been the company I'd started with my settlement money. Chaos Lab was everything Dataflow should have been. Instead of exploiting innovative employees, we gave them equity stakes in every project they contributed to. Instead of extracting maximum value for executives, we shared profits equitably among everyone who contributed to our success. Instead of using legal contracts to trap talented people, we encourage our employees to pursue their own ventures and maintain friendly relationships with those who left to start competing companies. The company was built around the rebuilt and improved chaos algorithm, which I'd spent months perfecting after reclaiming the intellectual property rights. The new version was more accurate, more efficient, and more ethical than anything Dataflow had ever deployed. We'd implemented strict privacy protections, algorithmic transparency requirements, and bias detection systems that ensured our technology couldn't be used to discriminate against vulnerable populations. Our client list was growing rapidly, but we were selective about who we worked with. We refused contracts with companies that had poor labor practices, environmental records, or histories of exploiting their workers. We required all clients to sign agreements ensuring that our technology would be used to benefit employees and customers, not just to maximize executive compensation. The financial results had been impressive. In our first 6 months of operation, Chaos Lab had generated $127 million in revenue while maintaining the highest employee satisfaction scores in the industry. Our average salary was $185,000, with additional equity participation that meant every employee shared in our success. We offered comprehensive health care, unlimited vacation time, and professional development budgets that encouraged continuous learning. But the real measure of our success wasn't financial. It was cultural. We'd proven that a technology company could be both profitable and ethical, both innovative and fair. We'd shown that treating employees well didn't hurt the bottom line. It strengthened it. Last month, Forbes had featured Chaos Lab on their cover, with the headline, "The Anti-Dataflow: How Sarah Chen Built a Billion-Dollar Company on Principles Instead of Exploitation." The article had detailed our employee ownership model, our ethical technology practices, and our commitment to sharing success with everyone who contributed to it. Reading that article, I'd thought about the young woman who'd walked into Dataflow 3 years ago with student debt and big dreams. She'd been naive enough to believe that hard work and innovation would be rewarded fairly. She'd trusted that creating something valuable would lead to being valued herself. That naivety had cost her years of exploitation and financial hardship. But it had also led to something bigger: a complete transformation of how business could be done in the technology industry. The other day, I'd received an email from a young programmer named Jessica Martinez, who worked at a major tech company in Seattle. She'd seen my congressional testimony and wanted to tell me about an algorithm she'd developed that could revolutionize supply chain optimization. Her company was excited about the technology's potential, but had offered her only a small bonus for her contribution while preparing to build a new division around her innovation. "I don't want to end up like you did at Dataflow," Jessica had written. "But I also don't want to give up on my dreams of creating something meaningful. What should I do?" I'd called Jessica that afternoon and spent 2 hours talking through her options. I'd explained her rights, connected her with employment lawyers, and offered her a position at Chaos Lab where she'd receive equity participation for any innovations she contributed. More importantly, I'd assured her that she didn't have to choose. Between her dreams and fair treatment, she could demand both. That conversation had reminded me why Dataflow's destruction had been necessary. It wasn't just about my personal revenge, though that had certainly been satisfying. It was about sending a message to every company that thought they could build fortunes on stolen innovation while treating their most valuable employees as disposable. The message had been received. Across Silicon Valley, technology companies were restructuring their compensation packages to include meaningful equity participation for innovative employees. Law firms were reporting a surge in intellectual property claims from workers demanding fair compensation for their contributions. Business schools were adding courses on ethical innovation management and equitable profit sharing. Change was happening, slowly but inevitably. And it had started with one young woman who'd refused to accept that creating billions in value should only be worth a 15% pay cut. As I closed my laptop and prepared to leave the coffee shop, I thought about Marcus Whitfield sitting in his federal prison cell. He'd lost his fortune, his freedom, and his reputation. His name would forever be associated with corporate greed and exploitation. His rise and fall would be studied in business schools as a cautionary tale about the dangers of wage theft and innovation appropriation. But I'd gained something far more valuable than the money I'd won or the satisfaction of his punishment. I'd gained the knowledge that one person with sufficient determination could change an entire industry. I'd proven that justice wasn't always delivered by the system. Sometimes you had to create it yourself. The chaos algorithm had been designed to predict the future. But sometimes, instead of predicting the future, you have to build it. And the future I was building was one where innovation was rewarded fairly, where employees shared in the success they created, and where brilliant young programmers like Jessica Martinez would never have to choose between their dreams and their dignity. That future was worth everything I'd gone through to create it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.